Hello and welcome. It's 6:30 p.m. here in Chicago, which means it's time for the next installment of our virtual Harper Lecture series. My name is Colin Hennessy, and as Executive Director of UChicago Alumni, which represents the more than 180,000 University of Chicago alumni around the world, it's my pleasure to welcome you. In March, when we made the difficult decision to move the Harper Lectures online, we didn't know if anyone would join us. For more than 40 years, we've been bringing UChicago faculty to cities around the world to share their research and engage with alumni and friends, and we just didn't know if anyone would follow us online. I'm pleased to say that follow us you did. Thus far, nearly 11,000 alumni and friends have watched a Harper Lecture live. And for those who couldn't join in person, almost 120,000 of you have watched one of our recent Harpers via our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us and for sharing your feedback. We are all so happy to hear that you're enjoying this virtual series. Now, before we begin, I have a few brief comments. There will be a few people speaking today. You'll hear my voice, our volunteer leaders, and our faculty presenters. All other participants will be muted. We would like you to join by participating and ask questions. To do that, type a question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen anytime during the talk. If you have issues with your audio, you may want to shut down programs running in the background or dial in from your telephone. We're recording today's lecture and we'll make it available on the Harper Lecture YouTube channel. Our presentation will last for about 60 minutes. Our faculty expert will speak, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. I'm delighted to be joined by two members of the Chicago Booth Club of Greater DC who were instrumental in helping to organize today's lecture. Tosin Olusola, Booth MBA 2017, and Aaron Squires, Booth MBA 2008, are exceptional volunteers for the Chicago Booth Club in the DC area. Tosin is a finance professional at United Airlines, and Aaron is the chief of staff to the CEO at the tech firm Government CIO. Tosin will introduce our faculty expert, and Aaron will help to moderate the Q&A. Aaron and Tosin, thank you for joining us. Tosin, the mic is all yours.
Thank you, Colin. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tosin Olusola. I am an alumni of the Booth class of 2017. And I'm also the co-leader of the Chicago Booth Alumni Club of Washington, D.C. Our mission is to build a stronger community to enrich the personal and professional lives of our alumni and students, creating an outlet for engaging intellectual content. This event closely aligns with our mission, and we are truly grateful for everyone who's decided to join us today. Nick Epley is the John Templeton Keller Professor of Behavioral Science and Director of the Center for Decision Research at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Professor Epley studies social cognition, how thinking people think about other thinking people, to understand why smart people so routinely misunderstand each other. Professor Epley teaches a very popular ethics and well-being course to MBA students called Designing a Good Life. His research has appeared in more than 24 empirical journals. He's been featured by the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, Wired, National Public Radio, and among many others. He's also been funded by the National Science Foundation and the John Templeton Foundation. Professor Epley has received the 2008 Theoretical Innovation Award from the Society of Personality and Social Psychology, the 2011 Distinguished Scientific Award for Early Career Contribution to Psychology from the American Psychological Association, the 2015 Book Prize for the Promotion of Social and Personality Science, the 2018 Career Trajectory Award from the Society for Experimental Social Psychology. Professor Epley was named a professor to watch by the Financial Times. He is also regarded as one of the world's best 40 under 40 business professors by Poets and Quants. He's also regarded as one of the 100 most influential in business ethics in 2015 by Ethisphere. Professor Epley is also the author of MindWise, How We Understand What Others Think, Believe, Feel, and Want. On behalf of the Washington, D.C. Alumni Club, we are so very excited for this discussion today. To put it bluntly, this pandemic has been challenging for so many. But however, it also presents a really unique opportunity for change, for reset, for redirection, both personally, in our leadership capacities, as well as for our communities at large. So with that, I give you Professor Epley.
Thank you so much, Tosin. That was a lovely introduction and very fitting for what I'm wanting to do here tonight. And I want to thank everybody for coming and joining this session this evening or this morning or this afternoon or wherever you happen to be joining me from. One of the silver linings of this pandemic is that it has required us to learn how to connect with each other in all sorts of different ways that we didn't know how to connect with each other these ways before. And it's also allowed us to expand our reach beyond just the halls and the conference rooms where we can bring people in to hear us in person. It's likely without the situation we're in now, I would not be able to speak to you tonight, and I'm very grateful for that. And I thought it would be fitting tonight, given that this is an alumni crowd at University of Chicago community, to actually bring you into my classroom. Tonight, as Tosin said, I teach a class, an ethics and happiness class called Designing a Good Life. And I thought I would welcome you into the class tonight. So those of you who are younger students now and are taking class right now, you know this is what class looks like in 2020. This is what university teaching looks like in 2020. And for those of you who have a little more patina on your degrees, well, you'll feel a little younger tonight. Maybe you'll get a sense of what the kids these days are experiencing. As Tosin said, now's the time when many of us are pausing and reflecting a bit. And even though we're in different times, there are some things that are sort of constants about education. And one is that education is an opportunity, is a place where we can pause and reflect and think about what we want out of life. You go and get education and you spend time at events like these because you're hoping that they will help you improve in some way, to do better in some way, to achieve some goal you want to achieve in your life. What is it that we're all trying to achieve? Lots of different things, of course. But what I'm going to suggest tonight and what I suggest to my students in class is that we all sort of want the same kind of thing out of life, at least broadly speaking. And that is, I'm going to assume that we all want to live a good life. Not in a simple sense of the term of good life, but in a rather complicated sense of that term. In particular, I'm going to suggest that we want to, three ways in which we want to live a good life when we look back on our lives. The first way in which I assume that we want to live a good life is that we'd like to be successful. We'd like to succeed. We'd like to do well in life, however you might want to define that. How do we define that? Well, in the business world, at least, which is where my students are from, we sort of have clear markers about what success looks like. Milton Friedman, our very own economist at the University of Chicago, knew this well when he said, quite famously, that there's one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits. That is, one sign of success in the business world is that you make a lot of money. And that's often presumed to be a source of success in personal life as well. I don't presume, though, that that's probably the only thing you want in life, but maybe you do. In fact, we can find out how important this is to you by collecting some data here tonight. As you know, that's something we do a lot at the University of Chicago. We're always trying to collect data. And so tonight, in fact, I'm going to start off by asking you a question. We're going to have a little poll here. I want you to answer this question. To what extent you disagree with this? Making a lot of money is my most important goal. I'll give you 14 seconds and a famous song to answer this. Go ahead and click the answer on the screen that most closely fits your sensibility. And here we go. We have about 80% of you in some way disagreeing with, 21% strongly disagreeing, 60% of you disagreeing with it, 17% of you agree, and only 2% of you strongly agree with it out of the couple thousand people we have joining us tonight. You guys are special in lots of different ways, but in terms of the response to this particular question, not so unusual, not so special compared to what I typically see. In fact, this is a question that I ask my MBA students every year. It's actually part of a psychopathy measure that I give my MBA students. And here's what the responses over the years from all of the MBA students that I've taught over the last few years look like. They have a similar kind of distribution. At least about 80% of them disagree with this. About 20% of them agree, and not very many, only about 1% of them strongly agree with this. Now, even those of you who agree or strongly agree with this, I presume that this probably isn't still the only thing that you want in life. Indeed, nobody goes into this world taking a vow of poverty, of course, or few of us do. But I presume that most of you want to something else more broadly too, even if you agreed with that statement. What else do you want out of your life if it's not just to succeed or just to make money? Well, the second way in which I presume you want to live a good life is that you'd like to be good. That is, be good in an ethical sense. That is, you'd like to succeed in a way in your life that you can be proud of, that you can look back on your life and feel proud of what you have done and how you have done it. Be good in a sense that allows you to tell your parents, your kids, exactly what you do, exactly how you succeed in excruciating detail, and be proud of what you have done. That is, I presume that you want to live your life ethically. Now, what does it mean to be ethical? That sounds like a quagmire that you never want to get yourself into. But in fact, psychologically speaking, I think it's pretty easy to define what we mean by ethical. Almost everything that we refer to as ethical or unethical, compared to things that are maybe just opinions or preferences, are social in nature. That is, something falls into the ethical realm, at least from our psychological intuitions, when they are social events. So lying and cheating and stealing is considered to be unethical because of its implications for others. You can lie to yourself, you can steal from yourself, and you might consider that to be stupid, but you wouldn't consider that to be unethical. All ethics are social. They deal with how we treat each other in one way or another. And the desire to be good is not something that I think is particularly unique in, say, Western society. The Dalai Lama, for instance, once said that our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. We see the interest in being ethical even among our very own Milton Friedman. And because in that quote that I showed you just a moment ago, there is a second part of that quote that's often left off, where he says there's one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits, the mantra of capitalism for decades. But notice how this ends. So long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. That is, Friedman assumed that a business's only responsibility was to make money because he already assumed the business was being ethical. That is, they were behaving fairly and openly in a free market system. You see the desire to be good showing up in young kids. You see it showing up in our natural inclinations as adults. You even see the desire to be good showing up, that instinct we have to be decent to each other, showing up in some of the most extreme moments of life. These data here that I'm going to show you deal with morality in times of war. And there's some of the most amazing data I've come across in my couple decades as a behavioral scientist. These are statistics reported by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who's a military historian at West Point. And what he noted is, if you look throughout military history in times of battle, when you're standing, across the battlefield from someone who's trying to kill you, who you have dehumanized, even in those cases, people find it surprisingly hard to kill each other. They have an aversion to harming others that's hard to overcome. You see this in lots of ways. So Grossman reports only about 15 to 20% of soldiers in World War II were even able to discharge their firearm. Foxholes in Europe were full of guns that had never been fired. When left on their own, Grossman wrote, the great majority of individual combatants appear to have been unable or unwilling to kill. And once they were shooting, they had a hard time killing the enemy. So in the Civil War, soldiers shot muskets that would hit a pie plate at about 70 70 yards, which is lethal enough to kill a person at 70 yards pretty easily with one shot. And yet the kill rate in the Civil War was shockingly low, given the technology that they had and the weapons that they were using. Only 1 to 2 people killed per minute in a battle with 200 soldiers standing only 30 yards apart, he calculated. This goes back further in the American Indian War, as the United States was moving westward and destroying basically every human being in our path. At a battle at Rosebud Creek, 25,000 musket balls were fired to wound or kill 99 Native Americans, only wounding 1 for every 252 shots. And in World War I and II, it's estimated that only about 5% of soldiers are responsible for nearly all of the killing. Most soldiers, when they were firing, shot over the enemy's head. And as Grossman said, times have changed now in the military. Military has learned that people have a very strong natural aversion to harming each other, to being bad in that sense. And so now the military is just much better at training people to kill. As he writes, indeed, from a psychological perspective, the history of warfare can be viewed as a series of successively more effective tactical and mechanical mechanisms to enable or force combatants to overcome their resistance to killing other human beings, even when defined as the enemy. Most of the killing that's done in war these days are done at a great distance with technology, often from trailers in Nevada, flying drones even these days. So that's the second way in which I assume you want to live a good life. Like most people, you'd like to be good and you have an aversion to being bad. Our natural instinct out there in the world is often to help others. That's our gut response. When you ask people to make decisions quickly, they tend to be more generous than to be more selfish out in the world. And the third way in which I presume you want to live a good life is that you like to feel good. You like to be happy. You don't want to be sad or depressed or miserable in your life. You'd like to feel good. That is, there's a bit of a hedonist inside you as well that wants to feel good. This is not a new 21st century Gen Z phenomena. This is something that I think goes back a long way in human history. Aristotle, for instance, said that happiness is at once the best, the noblest, and the pleasantest of things. And although we might quibble with the grammar a little bit, we certainly don't quibble with Aristotle's sentiment here. Our founding fathers, when they wrote the U.S. Declaration of Independence, certainly didn't quibble with the sentiment when they put the pursuit of happiness into the Declaration of Independence as one of our inalienable rights. Alexander Pope, famous philosopher and writer, said happiness is our being's end and aim. He argued that all of our choices could be thought of as implicit predictions about what's going to make us happy, because he suggested that was really the only thing that we're pursuing, and every choice could be thought of as a decision about what will make me more or less happy. And Blaise Pascal noted, or at least argued, that there are no exceptions to this. If he was writing today, he would also note that all women seek happiness, is not just a male thing. As far as we know, there are no gender differences on this dimension. We want to be happy. And so this is the way in which I presume we want to live a good life out there in the world. Psychologically speaking, at least, we'd like to succeed. We'd like to do well. We'd like to do so ethically, and we like to feel good about what we're doing. But this inherently raises a deep question right at the top of the slide there, namely, can we get all of this stuff? Mick Jagger famously sang that you can't always get what you want, but can you get what you need in this case? Can we get what we need, or perhaps more important, can we get what we want out of our lives here? Can we get a good life in each of these three senses of the term, or do these goals maybe compete with each other a little bit? So this raises some important questions. First, is the first sense of doing good compatible with the second sense of living a good life? That is, does being good lead to doing well out in the world generally? We can ask this broadly in terms of success in the world. We can also ask this about business success. I'll sort of focus on business success here. Does being good out in the business world lead to doing well in the business world? Does ethics pay? Now, for some, this is obvious that, of course, ethics pays. What do we mean by being ethical? Remember, all ethics are social, so being good in business means treating your people and treating folks you work with decently, fairly, honestly, openly. Again, for some, this is obvious that this matters. Famous industry analyst once wrote that well-treated employees show up happier and more dedicated to company success. They steal less and work harder. That is when you treat people ethically. Customers who receive what was promised to them and who are treated with respect will return more frequently for more business and recommend more friends to patronize the business. Anyone who needs a study to prove these common sense observations about the impact of good ethics on good business is beyond help, he writes. Now, I assume, in fact, that we do need some help on this front. What I assume is that we need some data on this. And in my class, I spent a lot of time on this, showing the data about how, in fact, ethics, through the way we treat our people and the way other people treat us, is aligned with business success, not always in the immediate short term, but is aligned with success in the long term. So the main business argument for ethics is one of sustainability. Gil is right. It may not be obvious to everybody, but Gil is certainly right in the data. But you can also see this from a review that Deutsche Bank did, actually reviewing the academic literature of all people. And this is their summary statement from a report that they wrote that reviewed all of the academic literature, looking at how good business practices, ethical business practices, are related to business success, and in particular, at least in this case, in terms of borrowing ability and cost of capital. And this is what they wrote. They wrote, "We're surprised by the clarity of the results we uncovered. 100% of academic studies agree that companies with high ratings for CSR, corporate social responsibility, and ESG, those are environmental, social, and governance factors, those are mostly the ethical ones, have a lower cost of capital in terms of debt and equity. In effect, the market recognizes that these companies are lower risk than other companies and rewards them accordingly. This finding alone should put the issue of sustainability squarely into the office of the chief financial officer, if not the board of every company." Indeed, I know of no research that shows that systematically unethical behavior pays in the long run. But I don't have time to get into that in great detail tonight. What I want to focus on more tonight is the relationship between these last two ways in which we want to live a good life. And that is, are these last two ways of living a good life compatible with each other? Does being good to others lead to feeling good yourself? Does doing good feel good, or are these incompatible with each other? Remember, all ethics are social. They deal with how we treat other people, whether we're treating other people well or treating other people poorly. And again, for some, it was pretty obvious what the answer to this is. Thomas Jefferson argued once that I believe that every human mind feels pleasure in doing good to one another. And yet it's not actually clear when we think about this harder that the answer to this is so obvious, because doing good for others often comes at a cost to the self. And after all, it's supposed to be ourselves that we're most interested in. And there are times when it just feels a little good to be a little naughty, doesn't it? At least we think maybe it does sometimes. So it's not so obvious what the answer to this is. Does doing good feel good? Well, we can start to look at the data. That's what we want to look at to answer this question. We want to look at some evidence, and I could spend a lot of time going through data on this. I'm only going to show you a couple of different data sets and analyses that help us to answer this question. First, let's go to Milton Friedman's quote about the importance of profit in business and thinking about money in our own lives as well. We can start with the question not by what happens when we do good for others, does that bring us happiness? But what about when we do really good for ourselves? That is, what about when we acquire the thing that we're seeking most often for ourselves to achieve some personal success, namely money? Does money, the thing that we acquire for ourselves to benefit our well-being, does that actually bring us a lot of well-being? Psychologists, economists, sociologists, lots and lots of different people have looked at this question in lots and lots and lots of different ways. We have a pretty clear answer to it, I would say now. And I think the clearest way to show you the importance of money on happiness is to show you this data set here. This is from Danny Kahneman and Angus Deaton, both of them Nobel Prize winners in economics, although neither of them economists themselves. Danny Kahneman is a psychologist and Angus Deaton is a sociologist. But what they did here was they analyzed a Gallup survey of just a little under 500,000 Americans in 2009. And one of their main questions was, how is income, how is the amount of money that you make yourself related to your well-being and also to your general evaluation of the quality of your life. And so what they did was they measured how much money people make, measured their income, and then asked them a bunch of these questions here that had to do with their well-being. Asked them about positive affect, how happy they reported feeling, how often they smiled on a given day, how much they were enjoying that day, the extent to which they reported feeling blue. This is reverse scored so that higher numbers indicate not feeling blue, so they're all going in the same direction. This percent of people report not feeling worried or sad. They asked about stress. How stressed are you feeling? Again, in the graph I'm going to show you, this is reverse score, so that higher numbers indicate feeling less stress, a more positive experience. And then they measured this general evaluation of life, this latter measure, which is not really a measure of happiness or well-being. It's a measure of social comparison, how you're doing compared to others. And the question is, how are these measures related to positive affect or the inverse of negative affect? And here's the graph that you can see. This is a graph that got this paper the most attention. If you've heard of this paper, it's because of this particular graph. And what you can see along the x-axis there at the bottom is the annual amount of income that the respondents were making. And on the y-axis there, you can see the fraction of the participants reporting experiencing one of these measures on the right. And the higher the numbers here, the more positive the experience. And so you can look very clearly, does making more money increase the amount of positive affect you feel? And the answer is no duh. Yeah, it does. It really does. That's like a one-item IQ question. Of course, making more money makes you happier. Now, there are some important caveats to that answer, though, to that one-item IQ question. And there are two things you can see in this graph. One is that nearly all of this effect on well-being and negative affect and so on comes at the bottom end of positive affect, the negative affect, and the stress measure. Mostly being poor is miserable. That's what it is. It's not so much that being really wealthy is associated with eternal bliss, but being poor is in fact pretty miserable. And what they found was that beyond a certain threshold, in these data it was 75,000, they had a hard time detecting how any increases in income were associated with increases in hedonic well-being. So the income satiates on well-being. That's now been replicated around the world. You see this satiation effect in every country that's been studied, different levels of money depending on the average amount of income in a given country, but you see that effect everywhere else. But from my perspective, that's not the interesting feature of this survey. The interesting feature of this survey, from my perspective, is what was in table 1, looking at what else is correlated with happiness, because we can ask the question, does money bring happiness? And yes, it does some, but we can also ask compared to what? Compared to other things you might also be doing that could also be bringing you some well-being. And that's what they looked at in some of these other measures as well. So the Gallup survey also asked people about lots of other things that had nothing to do with money. And what you can then do is see how changes in income are related to happiness compared to changes in these other dimensions and how those are related to positive affect and the absence of negative affect. So what they did then was compared the effect size of changes in money. They created an index variable, which they called high income. They split their income distribution in half and looked at the difference between the bottom half and the top half on positive affect, negative affect, stress, and the comparison measure, again, which is not a happiness measure. And what I'm showing you here in this table is the effect of low income versus high income on, say, positive affect. That's the regression coefficient. It's positive, meaning that the more, when you're in the top half, you had more positive affect than if you're in the bottom half. That's an effect size. What you can then do is look at the ratio of that effect size compared to being, say, in the top or the bottom of any of these other things that they also measured. So they measured lots of other things, like how much insurance you had. They measured your age, whether you graduated from college, your religiosity, right? And you can look at the top and the bottom half of those measures and compared the effect sizes across those measures against the top and the bottom half of the income distribution. Top versus bottom half of income, by the way, is a difference of about $58,000, a fourfold increase in your income to go from a high income to the low income group. So what you see in the rest of this table then are essentially the ratios of high versus low income against being high versus low on these other measures. So look at the first line there. High income, right? This is regressed against itself, a ratio against itself. So obviously that's 1. But what you see in the second line here, this is insured, whether you were heavily insured or not so heavily insured. And what you see, that gets you about 40% of the effect size of a $58,000 difference in your income. So about 40% of the effect of happiness comes from being insured versus uninsured. Being old. Good news here for all of you getting older out there. Turns out the happiest days of your life are ahead of you. You tend to get happier as you get older. And that effect size of being relatively old versus relatively young is about 80% of the effect size of low versus high income. Religiosity turns out to be a little bigger effect, whether you're highly religious versus not so religious. Turns out to have a bigger effect on positive affect than the high versus low income. But notice what the really big effect is here. Weekend is kind of fun. Happier on the weekend versus the weekday, bigger than a 4-fold increase in your salary. Sad testament to the state of work these days. But notice what the really, really, really big effect is. It's this one down here. It's being alone, feeling alone. 7 times bigger if you reported feeling alone today than not alone on your positive affect compared to a 4-fold increase in your income. That is a huge effect. What is correlated heavily with happiness? Income, yes. But really big are the quality of your social relationships. Those are really big effects. If I want to know how happy you are in your daily life, mostly I want to ask you about 2 questions: how meaningful you find your work to be, and second, I want to ask about the quality of your social relationships. If you're getting along well with others, you're feeling socially connected, you tend to be happier than if you're feeling alone or isolated. That tends to be miserable. It's also terrible for your health. And you can see the importance of quality social relations when you look at just what makes the happiest people. That is what differentiates the people who report being the happiest in a survey from people who are the least happy in a survey. This is a famous study by Adina and Marty Seligman. These are 2 psychologists. They just replicated this recently, a couple of years ago. And what they did was they just analyzed survey responses from several thousand participants here and tried to differentiate the happiest from the least happy people, or try to determine what differentiates the happiest from the least happy people. And what they found was critical was the quality of social relations. So you can see in the top line here, those who reported being very happy reported having more close friends than those who are very unhappy, stronger family relationships, stronger romantic relationships than those who reported being very unhappy. These people's peers reported that very happy people had stronger relationships than those who are very unhappy. And you can also see it in how they spend their day, the way they spend their time. Those who are very unhappy reported spending more time alone than those who are very happy. And those who were very happy reported spending more time with their family, friends, or romantic partner than those who are very unhappy. All of these data, by the way, is the reason why psychologists, you're probably reading a lot in the news these days, why psychologists are deeply concerned about what this pandemic is doing, not just to our physical health, but to our mental health, as it's increasing our sense of isolation and disconnection from others that we have to work hard to try to maintain. As Diener and Seligman ended up writing here, concluding, they found that no variable was sufficient for happiness, but good social relations were necessary. Our happiness depends very heavily on how well we're getting along with other people. And this then allows us to go back to this question about whether doing good feels good. Remember, all ethics are social. So does treating other people well in ways that strengthen relationships therefore make us feel good in turn? Some of these data I just showed you suggest that they ought to. Well, do we see it in practice? Remember, all ethics are social. So what we want to know is, are the people who are treating others well versus maybe focusing on themselves, are those people happier when they're treating others well? Lots of different ways to look at this. Again, I'm going to show you just a very thin snapshot of these data. These results here come from Liz Dunn, who's a wonderful psychologist at the University of British Columbia. She's done a bunch of research on this. This is from, again, another Gallup survey, a national survey here, where they look to see how people spent their money. If money isn't hugely related to happiness, maybe you could get more happiness if you spend it a little more wisely, maybe spending it a little more on others than on yourselves. And so what they did was they asked participants in this survey a general measure of happiness, the single item here in this survey, and then also asked them how they spent their money. how much money they spent on themselves, personal spending here, as well as pro-social spending, the amount that they spent on others, which we might think of as treating others well, something we might think of as more ethical gifts for others and donations to charity in this particular case. And then also measure their absolute income, just the amount of money that they were actually making. What you can do then is look to see how these three measures, both the total amount of income you have, but also how you're spending your income on yourself versus or others, is related to that first question, how happy you feel in general. And here are the straight up regression coefficients. So what you see here is that the amount of money that people reported spending on themselves was not positively related, not significantly related to their reported happiness. The amount of money that they made, though, the amount of income, was positively related to their happiness. That's consistent with the data I showed you just a moment ago. Not a crushing effect, but meaningful, not trivial for sure. But notice this is interesting. How people were spending their money, the amount of money people were spending on others, was also related to their happiness, and the effect size, the beta weight there, is just as big as the total amount of income that they were making. That is, for your own well-being, how people were spending their money seemed to matter just as much as the total amount of money they were making for their own well-being. And this suggests then we might be able to acquire some happiness through prosociality, through treating other people well. There are lots of results that look like this, including around the world. We see this effect now in almost every country in the world that's been studied. But this is not, in and of itself, a clear demonstration that treating others well, being good to others, being pro-social towards others makes you happier than maybe, say, benefiting yourselves. Because notice, this is a correlation here, and we can't separate cause from effect in a correlation. In order to figure that out, we have to do what scientists do, which is we run an experiment. In fact, that's the only reason why the scientific method exists, is to determine, I would argue at least, causality. And so that's what I can show you here. This is an experiment that Liz Dunn did here, which is very simple, which gave people some money and then just asked them to spend it in one way or another. It's sort of the best kind of psychology experiment you could ever hope to be in. So participants in this experiment came into the laboratory. They were given $5 or $20, and they were told to go out and either spend it on themselves or spend it on somebody else. Okay. Now, before going out, they were interested in how people expected to feel from this. I think people often misunderstand this relationship. I'll argue in a moment, and that can impair our ability to live the kind of good life that we want to live. And so they measured people's expectations about what would make them the happiest, because after all, it's those expectations that guide our behavior and our choices, not just our experiences. So one group first predicted which condition would make them the happiest, spending on themselves or spending on other people. You can ask this to yourself. These folks did not get the long lecture lead-in that you just got before answering this question. But 2/3 of folks said that they thought spending on themselves would make them happier than spending on others. Which would make you happier, spending $20 or spending $5? No duh. People thought spending more money would make them happier than spending less. It turns out, though, when you look at people's actual experience in this experiment, both of these predictions were wrong, on average at least. So here are the actual results of how happy people reported feeling. This is a comparison between how they reported feeling at the start of the experiment and how they reported feeling at the end of the experiment. So this is a change score here. And what you see is that those in the pro-social condition who were asked to go out and spend money on others, the red bars here, reported feeling happier at the end of the experiment than they did before, while those in the personal condition who were asked to spend on themselves, if anything, reported feeling a little worse. And notice the amount of money actually didn't matter. Whether you were doing a little bit of good for somebody else or doing a little more good for somebody else didn't matter for how good you felt. A little bit went a long ways in both of these cases. That's something we're going to come back to later. So these data suggest that yes, in fact, doing good for others can make you happier compared to doing good at least for yourself in this particular case. And notice the prediction there, people didn't seem to appreciate that. That is, they didn't seem to recognize on average that spending on others would make them happier, doing good for others would make them feel happier than doing good for themselves. And that, I think, is a very robust and reliable effect. It's one we focus on in my lab almost entirely anymore. And I think it's a very robust effect. We tend to undervalue how positive we and others will feel when we're good to other people. That is, when we behave pro-socially. Indeed, if you look out there in the world, either the world right now, but at least we were looking before the current state of the world that we are in, people don't seem to be in all times and in all ways as pro-social as they could be. If connecting with others, if being decent to others brings us happiness, people don't seem to be doing as much of it maybe as they ought to be doing for their own well-being. And we might undervalue how positive we would feel if we actually reached out and connected to others in positive, pro-social, ethical ways. I first noticed this and started studying this about 10 years ago, roughly, when I noticed something on my way into the office in Hyde Park every day on the train that I would ride. I was writing a book at the time about how amazing it is, this mental capacity we have to connect with the minds of others, and how important those connections were for our happiness and for our well-being. And yet every day on the train, I would get on the train and I would notice the same thing happening day after day after day after day, that perfectly decent people from the south side of Chicago, where I live, would get on the train and they would line up along the outside window. God forbid you'd sit next to somebody else. There are a few people sitting next to each other. These folks here, they happen to be married to each other. They're not talking to each other, but they are sitting next to each other. But mostly people would line up along the wall here. I was sitting here on this particular day. Then we would go down to the next station. People would get on. They would sit down here next to you. And then for 45 minutes, overwhelmingly, people would just ignore each other. If connecting to others, if being decent to others, if being civil, if being nice and positive to others is good for our health and our well-being, people don't seem to be practicing it very much. I don't think this is a unique phenomena in Chicago. I don't think we're particular jerks. This happens lots of other places as well, where people, when given a chance to be good or decent or pro-social to others, don't seem to take it, at least in terms of connecting. We might imagine that this is sort of a new phenomena, keeping us disconnected from others, focused on ourselves, less focused on others, whether we're out in the world or at home. But it's not actually so obvious to me that that's true. There always seems to have been some sort of barrier to reaching out and connecting in a positive way with others. Stanley Milgram, famous psychologist, made famous for his work on obedience, got interested in this some years ago. This was in the 1970s, got interested in urban anomalies. One was that people in urban environments tend to be more lonely and isolated than people in rural environments. And he started studying norms of social life in New York City. And he noticed on the subway in New York, this was in the 1970s, the very same thing that I'm seeing, would see day after day on the trains here in Chicago. The requirements of appropriate social behavior in the subway are, on the face of it, simple, he wrote. One rule is that seats are filled on a first come, first served basis. Another implicit rule is one that discourages passengers from talking to another. Even though riders are often squeezed into very close proximity, they are rarely observed to converse. So I don't think this is a totally new phenomenon. And this raises a question for us, for those of us who are out in our world trying to live this good life. If being good to others, if strengthening relationships, if connecting with others is a key to being happier ourselves, are we being pro-social enough for our own well-being? Or might we misunderstand the impact that connecting with others, that being good to others, can have on our own well-being, on our own happiness? Can we underestimate the extent to which doing good, feeling good, leads to feeling good? Well, to find out, we started some of you may have heard of this experiment already if you've seen a few talks of mine. We started by going back to the train that I ride into Hyde Park every day. And we had people either connect with somebody else or keep to themselves or do whatever they normally do. Now, there are two possible things that could be going on these trains. One possibility is that all these folks could be super wise and could be maximizing their own well-being. It's possible that connecting with others on the train could be miserable. There are times in our life, after all, when we want some isolation, we want some disconnection. This, for instance, is a picture of the bathroom in the business school building at the University of Chicago. I love my colleagues dearly, but this is not the place where I want social connection. This is a place where I want a little isolation. This is a place where I want a little me time, and I don't need to be connecting with others in this space. That partition is not significant enough. And it may be the case that trains are this way too. After all, there are all kinds of weirdos out there, crazy people. Maybe people want their solitude on the train, and you never know what kind of crazy person you're going to talk to on the train that would make it miserable. So maybe people are being wise by not connecting with others. Another possibility, though, is that, like in the Liz Dunn study, they underestimate how positive they'll feel if they reach out and do something nice for somebody, if they're just civil and have a pleasant, positive conversation to break the boredom there. Indeed, sometimes people seem to be seeking solitude where they don't need it. This is a picture of a bike rack outside the business school building at the University of Chicago one day. Everybody's going to the same door, notice, but they didn't want to be too close to each other with their bike. They all wanted their own solitude, their own individual bike rack. It's not sure that obvious that saves, that's the wisest thing to be doing there. So which is it? Are people being wise on the trains by not connecting, or are they undervaluing the positive experience that they could get from connecting with others? To find out, we ran an experiment. We went to Homewood, Illinois, ran an experiment where we had Jasmine Kwong, my amazing lab manager for about a decade, go to the bowels of the Homewood train station and recruit people for a commuter study. If they were interested, we randomly assigned them to one of three conditions. We asked them to either keep to themselves, enjoy their solitude that day. We asked them to do whatever they normally do, which is mostly keep to themselves, or we asked them to connect with a person who sits down next to them, to have a conversation with that person. At the end, they filled out a short survey and sent it back to us. We got about an 80% response rate for a few different reasons. Go into more detail, of course, in the paper. And what we asked them on that survey was a whole bunch of things, but the first four questions were what we were most interested about. We asked them how productive their commute was. Turns out we didn't find any differences across condition in reported productivity. And then we asked them about how positive the experience was, how happy they were, how sad they were, and how pleasant their experience was compared to normal. We reverse scored how sad they felt so that everything was going in the same direction, then collapsed that into an index of just how positive overall your commute felt. So we can ask, how did folks feel? Here are the results for how people felt. Those in the connection condition actually reported having a more positive commute than those in the solitude condition. Were people maximizing their well-being on the train? No, they weren't, in fact. They reported feeling happier when they connected than when they didn't, with no hit to their productivity. So why then are people not talking on the train? Overwhelmingly, almost nobody reports talking to strangers on the train. One possibility is, like in the Liz Dunn study, we misunderstand the connection between doing good, being pro-social and positive with others, and feeling good, forming connections to ourselves. To figure out if that's going on, we asked people to predict how they would feel in each of these conditions while they were riding the trains in. What did they expect would happen in each of these conditions? How did they think they would feel? They predicted exactly the opposite. They thought they would feel exactly the opposite, on average, of the way participants actually felt. That is, on average, they thought they would feel happiest in the solitude condition and least happy in the connection condition. Their expectations were just precisely backwards. We find this in lots of other places as well. These are buses in downtown Chicago. We find the same disconnect between people's actual experiences, which is more positive if you connect and have a conversation with somebody on the bus than if you don't, but their expectations are precisely the opposite. Now, those expectations matter because, of course, those are the things that guide our choices. As Gary Becker noted in his Nobel Prize winning address, the rational analysis, this is from economics, assumes that individuals maximize their well-being as they conceive it. Their behavior is forward-looking. Indeed, people tend to behave in ways that maximize their well-being as they conceive it, as they believe will bring them happiness or well-being. It's just that their expectations in these cases are mistaken. Nothing about the rational analysis requires that people's expectations be accurate, particularly when feedback is imperfect, as it is out in the world. People's expectations about the positive consequences of being good to others seem to be miscalibrated here. Since I've run this experiment, I've talked about it a lot. I inevitably get questions about, yes, but what about me? I'm introverted. Turns out introverts are also happier talking to strangers. Yes, but what about here in this place where people are different from everywhere else? We've started doing some of this research, and the first place that we've been able to go is to London. Yes, but what about in London? So we replicated this experiment on the commuter trains going into London. This time, Don Lyons, my amazing lab manager now, ran those experiments. Herculean effort there with about 500 folks in this in this experiment. After all, London's not a bad place to do this because Londoners are widely assumed to be not very social. So here are the Independent report, 7 stereotypes about British people that everyone believes. Number 5 is British people are rude. Okay, well, how do they actually feel when we ask them to engage with others? We partnered with the BBC in London to run this experiment. You can read more about this here. Did we replicate the effects in London? Here's what I'm going to show you. So these are the original experience data from Chicago. Those in the connection condition felt more positive than those in the solitude condition. I showed you that just a moment ago. In the London data, we can look at 2 different things. One is we can look at the people who actually followed the instructions, which was overwhelmingly most people, but not everybody was able to find somebody to talk to. If anything, the effect there in London was a little bigger. And looking at all of the London data, we see an effect size that's about the same as what we saw in the Chicago data. So yes, we get the same effect in London as far as we can tell. Even Londoners like talking to strangers. We see this phenomena underestimating how positive you'll feel if you reach out and connect with others in positive pro-social ways that we think of as being good to others in lots of different ways. Here's an experiment that comes from my class. We've replicated this outside of the class, of course, in lots of ways. But what I do in my class is I have all my students, every time I teach my Good Life class, write a letter of gratitude to somebody. We then ask them to predict how the recipient of their gratitude letter will feel. And then we contact the recipient and find out how the letter actually made them feel. So this is the very first time I ran it. I had 120 MBAs complete the survey, write gratitude letters, and send it out. 101 of those MBAs allowed us to email the recipients. 80 of those recipients responded and filled out the survey. What did my MBAs write about? Super personal stuff. These are amazing. We asked them to think about somebody who's done something really meaningful for them in their lives, who they have not yet had a chance to express their full gratitude to for that action. And so these are really meaningful. It's the best thing I do in class. By far, if you want to feel happier today, sit down and write a gratitude letter. The effects are big. How did they feel afterwards? They felt much better than they did before. I can show you this in the data. This is the reported mood before completing the survey at the beginning of my class. This is how those who filled out the survey reported feeling after class. You see the red bars on average are shifted up. People reported feeling happier after filling out the survey than before, and that statistical test is so big that it's embarrassingly large. Did they know how their recipient would feel? And the answer is sort of, but also there's some meaningful gaps. Again, suggesting that people underestimate how good they will feel when they are good to others. So we asked them to predict how surprised the recipient would be to receive the letter, how surprised they'd be about the content, how happy, predict the recipient's mood, how the recipient would feel afterwards. This is on a scale that goes from -5, I feel much more negative than normal, to +5, I feel much more positive than normal. I just added 5 to this, so it's on a 0 to 10 scale, same as the others. And also to predict how awkward the recipient would feel. Here are the predictions. They predict the recipient will be somewhat surprised to receive it, a little less surprised about the content. They predict the recipient will feel really good, almost at the ceiling of the scale. And they also predict the recipient will feel mildly awkward. That is, it'll be a little weird. So that's a cost to sending out the gratitude. It turns out they significantly mispredicted the recipient's responses on all of these. The recipients were more surprised to receive it, significantly more surprised about the content. They felt even better than the recipients thought they would feel, and also did not feel as awkward as they expected. The gratitude expressors underestimated how positive the recipients would feel, undervalued the benefit of prosociality. How do the recipients actually feel? This is how the recipients reported feeling on that scale that goes from -5, feel much more negative than normal, to +5, I feel much more positive than normal. Majority of our participants were actually at the ceiling of this measure. They gave the highest response we allowed them to give, which suggests if anything, we're underestimating the magnitude of this effect. We see this not just with expressions of gratitude like this, we see this in lots and lots of other cases as well. Here's another one from my class. We had people go out and do random acts of kindness. They predicted how big the recipient would find the act to be, how much time, money, and energy they thought the recipient would think they invested. They asked them to predict how positive the recipient would feel and also how awkward they would feel. And again, we see the same gaps here. The recipients of these random acts of kindness, these small acts of generosity, little bits of ethical actions, report experiencing the act as bigger, thinking that the actor spent more time, money, and energy than the actor reported spending. It was a bigger deal for them. Felt even more positive than the expressors expected they would, and did not feel as awkward as was expected, although the awkwardness effect here is a little bit smaller. Lady Montagu, a famous 17th century aristocrat, once wrote that civility costs nothing and it buys everything. Our data suggests that most of us don't calculate the value of civility in quite the same way, that we don't have quite the same exchange rate on that as Lady Montagu did. And if anything, we underestimate the value of being good to others and the impact that can have on us feeling good, and also underestimate the effect that it had, the positive effect it has on others. So let's go back to this first question. How do we design a good life? How do we increase the odds, live more wisely in a way that increases the chances that we're going to hit that narrow target that we're all hoping to achieve? That is to live a life that allows us to be successful, to be ethical, and to feel good, feel happy about what we're doing. Most of the time in my class, we focus on that second part about the importance of being ethical, because that turns out, if you look at the empirical evidence, to be critical for long-term success of business and for happiness and well-being, because it strengthens social relationships. We spend most of our time talking about how we create organizations or environments that help us be good. And there are a few important psychological insights that come from that. One is to treat ethics not as like a personal disposition or as much of as a moral issue, but rather as a design issue. We can enable people to be better by changing the context that they happen to be in. You can set up your life, you can set up your business, you can set up your organization in ways that make it easier to be good because of the policies and practice and procedures you put in place, and that avoid temptation by not allowing certain things or making it hard to do certain things or requiring you to think more carefully before you engage in some ethically questionable action. So for instance, making it easy to be good. I know about the value of expressing gratitude, both for my own well-being and for others. And so I've made it easy for me to be good. What's an easy way to do that? I make sure that I have cards around. This is a picture of my file cabinet in my office in the Harper Center in the business school building. You see, I've got a stack of gratitude letters there. When I moved my office home, I brought some thank you notes and hello cards with me. I have those sitting next to my office upstairs in my home as well. It's easier to express gratitude when you've got a gratitude letter handy, for instance. You need to structure environments in ways that keep your ethics top of mind. In many organizations, they use mission statements to do this. Problem is, most of the mission statements are totally unmemorable. They're not linked up to any meaningful practices. They're way too long for anybody to be able to recite. They can't keep them top of mind, and they don't see them around the organization anywhere. So an important aspect of being more ethical is to make sure your ethics, your values, your principles are top of mind when you're out there in the world. The ways in which you want to be good are things that you are thinking about. We try to foster this in my class by having my students create a personal responsibility statement that we then send framed to them that they can hopefully put on their desk. Here is my personal responsibility statement. This is a mission statement, essentially, for myself, for the kind of values, at least in my professional sphere, my professional life, that I want to keep top of mind, always guiding my research. And if we keep these kinds of personal responsibility statements top of mind, we can make it easy to do that by creating statements that make it more memorable, make it easy for us to see them. It's going to increase the odds that we behave in ways that are consistent with that. Again, this is my home office upstairs now. I brought the personal responsibility statement home. The idea for my students is they keep it on their desk somewhere where they can see it. Mine here is right next to my computer. Structuring ethics in ways, environments in ways that keep ethics top of mind. Second thing is that the important insight from well-being literature is that happiness is often a choice. That is, we can design our lives in ways that maximize our well-being if we make wise choices. And one way to think about doing that is to recognize that happiness is not so much a trait, some of it is, but that a lot of it is really a state that we can affect ourselves by making wise choices, as long as we do it repeatedly. And one key insight is to treat happiness like exercise, something you have to do routinely and often over and over again. The problem with exercise, of course, that we all know about is that we intend to do it, we want to do it, but we never quite get around to doing it. And so the key to to living a happy life is to make your goodness, your prosociality more of a habit. Keep a gratitude journal. These are things you need to do every day. For instance, do a daily random act of kindness. Buy a +1 for somebody every time you're in Starbucks. The lab school at the University of Chicago, after learning about our research, started this weekly Thankful Thursdays session to encourage gratitude. Chat with strangers around them. Smile when you're walking around. Even with it turns out even with just your eyes, you can do this with a mask as well. Happiness often comes through the eyes. Turns out when we ask people to go around smiling, they report being happier than we ask them to go around not smiling because other people smile back to you. Make prosociality a habit. And finally, sweat the small stuff. It turns out that your well-being is a mood state, and it's not totally sensitive to the magnitude of the experience that you're having. Happiness is a fleeting mood that responds disproportionately to small acts. Small acts of kindness turn out to make people feel often just as good as really big ones. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing the big ones, but it means sprinkling your life, keeping an eye out for opportunities to be a little bit good when you can, is an important key to both being more ethical in your life and to being happier as well. Turns out micro connections, these little small acts of kindness, small acts of reaching out and engaging with others, make people feel better as well. A happy life is not predicted by the intensity of positive experiences that we have, but the frequency of positive experiences. Now, studying well-being and what I think of as the good life scientifically is not going to make it easy for us to achieve this life. But I do think it's going to allow us to make choices more wisely about how we go about living our lives and how we structure our environments to help us live our lives that increase the odds of us living the kind of life we would like to live. Thank you so much for your time tonight. I know we've run a little bit long. I was trying to present a lot of material. I see that we have an awful lot of questions. I know Aaron and Don have been pooling those together. I am happy to stay for as long as anybody wants to answer questions here. I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and Don, who are going to throw some questions my way.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was fantastic. I was a student of Nick's 12 years ago in the full-time MBA program, and I still remember many of the points and even some of the moments from your classes. So I fully expect that some of the things that you said tonight will stick with many of us for a while to come. This event came about because when the shutdown hit Washington, D.C., it forced me to think about how I wanted to spend this time and immediately removed a lot of the ways that I had been defaulting to spending time, like the Sunday morning yoga class that I almost always went to across town. And I knew that one thing I wanted to do was reflect more on topics like these. So I think that Nick accepting our invitation to speak really shows that we still have the resources in the community of the university, as do all of our friends who also joined tonight. And we still have the findings and the research insights that come out of the university, literally no matter what else is happening in the world. I'm delighted to kick off the Q&A portion. Drop your questions in the Q&A box because Don will also try to field some of them one-on-one directly. So definitely feel welcome to keep sending those to us. We'll kick off with a couple questions that were submitted during the registration for this event by several of you. The first question, Nick, if you would please, is how do our criteria for a good life tend to change as we move through different phases of life?
Well, there's no doubt that the way you balance those goals is going to depend on what your immediate needs are. So there are times when making money is more important than others. There's no doubt about that. I think what's interesting is that the hedonic value, so if we think about our emotional states, the positive experiences that we get from connecting positively with others is not quite as dependent, does not seem to fluctuate quite as much with our immediate needs as, say, the need for money does. Now, I don't know of research that shows how much these things change over time, importance of, say, money independent of being successful independent of your own immediate success. But one thing we do know is that as people grow older, they tend to value quality social relations more. We don't know why. that is. So older people tend to narrow their social sphere and focus on building and maintaining relationships more than younger people do. And one possible explanation for that is that they have learned over the course of their lives through the noisy feedback that we get in daily life that having good social relations and investing in those is really valuable for our well-being. Um, that's the only thing I know about changing over the lifespan.
So we're learning. That's good news.
We hope. Yeah, it's hard. These are hard phenomena to learn, I will say, because your expectations guide your choices in ways that impair your ability to learn. So, Aaron, if I don't think it would be interesting to talk to you on the train, I'm not going to talk to you on the train, and I'll never find out that it could have been wrong, right? So, social life is what Robin Hogarth, one of our former faculty at the University of Chicago, called a wicked environment, where feedback is imperfect. It's asymmetric. You only get feedback when you approach other people out in the world. You don't get it when you avoid other people. And so it's hard to learn. Seems to take decades for people.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for doing the research, and I volunteer to hang out in London whenever you need to update your findings. Okay, Glenn Sykes asked that he comments that he remembers from other talks that he's heard that you give that we are the most social of beings, and that he's been thinking about this every day during the pandemic while he's been staying home. Have you been thinking about the impact these restrictions have had on our core sociability?
So first, Glenn, it's wonderful to hear from you. I hope you're doing well. I close my eyes and see you right in front of me. So it's great to hear from you. Yeah, we've been all psychologists, I would say every academic has been thinking a lot about how the pandemic is related to their current research interests, whatever they happen to do. From a psychologist's perspective, obviously the concern about the pandemic is that it creates social isolation. All of the everyday opportunities we had to connect with other people sort of informally by accident, walking to get coffee or down the sidewalk, you might say hi to somebody. Even if we're not doing it enough for our own well-being, then you would still have opportunities for sort of accidental contacts with others. Now, these choices are things that we all have to make deliberately. And I showed you in some of the data, and we have lots of other data on this as well, that people generally underestimate how positive the experience of connecting is going to be with others, and that creates a barrier to connecting with others more meaningfully. So I think that encourages more isolation even than would be good for us now when we need it most. The things that I would advise very quickly at this time, one, again, treat social connection, treat being good to other people like exercise. Make sure you're doing it every day. One of our staff members, Becky White, who manages the lab, her parents heard a talk of mine a little while ago, and they said that they created a list of friends that they are old friends they were going to try to reconnect with, and they do it each day. They treat it as their one a day, like a vitamin. And I think that was a good way to think about it. Think about folks you can reconnect with and then make an active choice to do it. I would encourage doing it one-on-one so you actually get time to talk with somebody. The video aspect of conversation isn't so critical, but the voice seems to be. It's hard, frankly, to beat a good old phone for reconnecting with others. So my advice during these times is to pick up the phone and call folks. It's not as good as being in person, of course, but it's better than nothing. Call folks.
Okay. Speaking of method, one of your most effective techniques you mentioned was expressing gratitude to somebody in your life. Does the format matter? Are there great differences in how you express, like writing a letter versus email or other ways of communicating that?
Yeah, I think not, but we've never run the carefully controlled experiment on this to find out. People have strong intuitions that a handwritten letter conveys more authenticity or effort or concern or care. But we don't really see that in the data. It doesn't seem to matter very much. The best data we have on this is actually from about 300 high school students. in Indiana who I had do this gratitude letter exercise for us. They show the same effects. High school kids show the same effects that everybody else does. And some of them wrote handwritten letters, others did email. It didn't matter for the recipient's experience of happiness. They were off the charts as well. So I guess what I would advise is do whatever is easiest to make sure that you get the thing done. So if it's easier for you to sit down and handwrite a letter, great, do it. If it's easier for you to sit down and write a heartfelt email to somebody or to call them on the phone, tell them, hey, I've been thinking about you and you did this thing that I just appreciated so much, then do that. Whatever is easiest for you to do that will enable you to do it, that's what you should do. Because it's not going to matter as much for the recipient.
What about, even if it's social media? If social media is easiest, is there a drawback to?
Well, so social media comes with other costs, namely with length. So if you send a note to over Twitter, that doesn't really convey a lot of warmth. That's what we find comes across in the gratitude letter. If you can't really fully express how positively you're feeling about somebody else, if you're limited by content, then that's not going to be so good.
Okay, got it.
But I wouldn't think, aside from length limitations, I wouldn't think it would matter.
Okay.
And if you're really good at 140 characters, maybe Twitter would be fine too.
All right. So no photos via Instagram. You mentioned designing your life to encourage acting good and feeling happy. And I'm wondering if there are things that you think employers can do to design their office cultures or lifestyles to encourage more happiness at work.
Oh yeah, there's a ton. One is treating your employees well and fairly is critical. Apologizing when you screw up. I mean, there are lots of those sorts of phenomena. But yes, there are lots of things that can be done. So lots of companies, well, some companies are now allowing, say, employees to reward each other easily. Make it easy to write a gratitude letter or to acknowledge something positive you saw somebody else do. Sometimes that comes with a monetary incentive, which I actually wouldn't advise. It kind of undermines some of the value of it. But making it easy to express your gratitude to somebody else is an easy way to do that in a firm. Having lots of symbolic recognitions, just acknowledging people for the good work that they have done, making people feel valued and appreciated is something that every company can do more of. Trying to do things that increase the sense of connection between employees is something that can be done a lot better in organizations. One thing I will mention to the alumni community right now that I have advised our dean's office to think about is we have a challenge next year with first year students coming in to our MBA program, and to undergraduates as well. Every these new students coming in may not be on campus with us. At least some of them may not be on campus with us. How do we connect with them? The alumni may have a huge role to play in this, in spending time with with some of our students who are trying to connect with the university remotely. So creating buddy systems or mentoring programs are good ways to make people feel better in organizations because they feel more connected to it. If folks are interested and they want more on this, I wrote a Harvard Business Review piece with Amit Kumar called How to Design an Ethical Organization. We go into a lot more detail there in case you're interested. It's available online.
Great. Speaking of MBA programs and designing structures, when times return to normal, it's not uncommon to hear alumni say after the program wraps that they miss the community and they miss always having something to look forward to the way that they did during business school. What do you think are the key elements that sort of naturally became part of your life when you're in a program like that? And I know you've given us a lot of tips tonight, but what are the key parts of that would be important to carry over into our non-education lives to create that same boost? It seems like a lot of things you're talking about very naturally are frequent boosts when you're in a program like that. Like,
Yeah, I mean, so whenever you go into a new environment, you're trying to establish lots of friendships. There's some anxiety that goes with it. And so there's lots of reaching out and connecting with strangers and forming new friendships that you didn't have before. And I would say that's, if there's one single thing um, that you could take from the university experience that builds these strong friendships, it's that, which is you come into a place, you start talking with folks, you start forming friendships. Interestingly, those friendships are often best predicted not by any personality or similarity fit, but just by who you've talked to or who you happen to be close to. We tend to like people that we talk to. And one of the things that you learn when you are talking with folks anew is that, almost everybody's got an interesting story to tell you. And in order to find that out, you have to talk to them and engage with them in conversation. So the big thing that happens when folks come into a new place is they form those new friendships that they wouldn't have had before. Often those stick because they then stay in the same sorts of social networks going forward. And that's something we can all replicate in our daily lives. You walk by lots of folks you would otherwise overlook and not engage in conversation with. Every one of those people has something interesting to tell you. And every one of them would feel appreciated knowing that you care to hear the interesting thing that they have to tell you. You just have to reach out and ask them for that.
maybe take advantage of the time people are spending in parks now.
For sure,
hanging out
yeah.
6 feet away
Yeah.
from each other.
Yeah, look, the data, again, I think that's important to keep in mind is that it's not the intensity of these positive experiences, it's the frequency of them, but there's a tipping point. Our data don't suggest that you should go out and try to be good all the time, you'll burn yourself out, but rather to keep your eyes open for opportunities when you can reach out and be nice or decent to somebody else. And you're sort of enriching your life by filling in your gaps of time with those moments of goodness.
Okay, thanks. We are sadly down to our last two questions. Nick, could you elaborate on the differences? You mentioned the differences or testing the differences in London and the US in some of your findings. Could you elaborate on the differences between Western cultures and Asian cultures, if any?
Yeah, so we were about to start an experiment on this. If Xuan Zhao, one of my postdocs, is watching this tonight, she will be groaning in pain at this right now. We were about to start an experiment in March. We find in research Xuan and I do that people underestimate how positive others will feel when you give them a compliment. And we were going to start running that experiment in March in a city in China named Wuhan. Yeah. So turns out we did not run, actually it wasn't March, no, it was like in January or February. Turns out we did not run that experiment. So we have not started these cross-cultural experiments that we want to run. We're planning them in India and we're planning them in China right now. My prediction is that there are lots of difference in people's expectations about how social interactions should go and what's appropriate and what's not, but much less meaningful differences in the actual experiences of connection. And now, if people were operating under mistaken expectations, you could get very big cultural differences in how people actually interact with each other. So people may compliment each other less, for instance, in collectivist cultures compliment strangers less, maybe, or be less likely to interact with strangers. But my prediction is that those are going to be differences in expectations that are much bigger than the actual differences in experiences. As far as we know, we haven't found a people group on the planet that doesn't feel good being treated well or decently or appreciated or feeling connected to somebody else or feeling loved by somebody else or being treated fairly. We don't see big cross-cultural differences in those dimensions, but there could be big differences in people's beliefs about what's appropriate, what's not, that guide their choices, even if it doesn't affect their experiences in the way they expect.
Makes sense. That will be fascinating to hear about.
We're working on it. We just got to wait for the rest of the world to open up.
So last question of the night, sadly, could you leave us with your suggestions for follow-up materials like books, articles, podcasts, and so forth. I know you already mentioned one to us, but that you wrote about office cultures and designing for happiness, but any others?
Yeah, so there's another webinar I did that's on if you just Google my name, University of Chicago News with Epley, you'll see another webcast I did in early April. That's more on the surprising power of sociality. I just wrote a piece for the Scientific American blog, which is titled "The Surprising Power of Social Outreach." That goes into some of this in more detail. And then there's the Harvard Business Review piece on how to design an ethical organization. I know that if you want to take my class, it turns out alums, at least through Booth, are able to take some of our electives in the summertime, though I think enrollment is happening for those right now, limited to 75 people in the class, but I'm teaching one this summer, and so that's a possibility too.
Okay, fantastic. I also heard Laurie Santos quote you recently, professor
Yeah,
at Yale, on happiness. So
Laurie's a good friend of mine. I'm in her Coursera class, and on her, she has a Happiness Lab podcast, and one of the episodes is titled "Mistakenly Seeking Solitude," which is about our train studies.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is all we have time for. Thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions and participating. And thank you, Don, for fielding some of those offline and also sending us great questions to field here. I will turn it over to Colin now for closing remarks.
And thanks to our audience for all of your great questions. I promise we got to as many of them as we could. Today, more than ever, the University of Chicago community gains strength by working together. To learn more about how the University of Chicago is combating COVID-19 and helping those impacted by the crisis, please follow this link on your screen to learn more. I'm Colin Hennessy, wishing you all good health and well-being. Thank you for joining us. You may now disconnect.